Boldwood presents Fatal Endings, written by Anita Waller and read by Richard Burnip. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. Khalil Gibran. Ask for me tomorrow and you shall find me a grave man. Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare. Chapter 1. Matt Forrester picked up his newly poured mug of coffee and opened the patio doors. He quietly moved the metal garden chair and sat down with a sigh. It was a beautiful morning. Not quite sunrise yet, but the sky was already a stunning shade of red, enhanced by the odd cloud or two. The weather forecast had promised a fine mid-March day, and his mind ran swiftly through the jobs he had to do that were definite ones, and debated if he could make them indefinite. Maybe then he could devote some time to getting the garden into shape. He looked up with a smile as his life partner Karen Nelson stepped through the doors to join him. "Just wow," she said, staring at the vista of Ridgeway spread out before them, and all of it tinged by the red sky. "This is worth getting up early for." "Certainly is. But if you've to be in work for 6, you can't sit there for long." She frowned. "Hate it when the top brass come, but I'll be home early. What time are you getting Harry up?" Matt laughed. "Maybe I should start any time now." His last words as he went to bed last night were that he didn't think it was worth going back to school for the last couple of weeks of term, that Easter was the 9th of April, and he expected everybody would bully him for running away in December. Of course, he had all sorts of reasons carefully thought out for not returning to school, but he's missed so much already, and he's 12 now. Such an important age for learning. I know he needs to go back. He's been so ill with that blessed pneumonia, but now he's been given the all-clear, so back to school he goes. Karen checked her watch. "Want me to go and wake him?" "No, I'll give him another half hour. Promise him a bacon sandwich for breakfast if he gets up straight away, and I'll run him to school. I'd like to watch what happens when he goes into the yard. Just check there's no silliness. I don't think there will be, but he's obviously worrying about the possibility, so I'll keep an eye on things. I'll pick him up tonight as well, so if I'm not in when you get home, that's where I'll be." Karen nodded. "No problem. Maybe we could go to McDonald's or something tonight. It's Harry's favourite. See if Steve and Herms want to join us. Celebrate Harry's return to full health." "Good idea. It might help ease things for him." They both watched the sun climb a little higher, sipping at their drinks and thinking about the boy that had caused them so much worry when he had run away from home. Fortunately, the reason behind his need to escape, Superintendent Brian Davis, was no longer a valid one, as the man was now living in London, almost divorced from Harry's mother Becky, and completely out of their lives. Karen drained the last of her coffee and stood. She walked around to Matt, kissed him, and left him to enjoy the red sky before his own day started. She was in the kitchen when her phone rang. She spoke quietly, gave a couple of instructions, and returned to the back garden. "Problems?" She nodded. "Body found. Thought I'd better tell you so you don't expect me home early. I'll keep you informed. Early morning meeting moved to this afternoon. I'm heading straight to join the team at the site. Take care. Ring if you need to talk." She smiled, blew him a kiss, and left to start her job. He suspected the trip to McDonald's might not happen now. Matt called Harry from the bottom of the stairs and waited for some sort of response. There was a grunt. He called again, and the grunt was increased to 2 grunts. His son sounded stressed. "Harry, final warning. Next stop is water torture." "I'm up," was Harry's response. "Listen." There were bangs on the floor that were meant to sound like footsteps, so Matt followed up with the warning that the bacon was almost ready, and unless he liked cold bacon sandwiches, he needed to be downstairs in 5 minutes. The footsteps changed to real ones. Harry's hair resembled a hedgehog in attack mode. "Morning," he mumbled. "Have I really got to go to school?" "You have. Uniform's in your wardrobe, and I would highly recommend a shower first to try to tame that hair. Breakfast in 1 minute, orange juice poured. Want anything else?" Harry pulled his dressing gown tighter around him and sat at the kitchen table. "No, I'm good." He gave a deep sigh. "I think I'm scared." "And I understand," his father said, while dealing with the safe delivery of the bacon sandwich. "But you'll probably turn out to be the star of the school because you managed to evade capture all the time you were on the run. It was only illness that forced you to contact me. Look, you'll have your phone with you, and if anything becomes unbearable, text me. Or even text Karen. But it seems she's dealing with a death, so she might not be available." Harry used both hands to pick up the overloaded bacon butty. "Thanks, Dad. This looks good. A death? At this time in the morning?" "It doesn't mean the person is newly dead. They could have died last night but only just been discovered." Harry thought about it, then nodded. "Suppose so. I've a lot to learn before I join your business, haven't I?" "The main thing you've to learn, young man, is you don't run away from anything, big or small. I know you thought you were protecting me, stopping me from hammering Brian Davis, but I'm the adult, and I'm old enough to make my own decisions, and it didn't work because I still hammered him anyway." Harry allowed a small smile to cross his face. "We won, though, didn't we? He's gone now. Mum said the divorce is nearly done, and he wants nothing to do with Florence." Mention of his baby half-sister brought a further smile to his face. He finished his breakfast and downed the last of his orange juice. "OK," he said. "Shower, dressed, and sort out my hair." "Good lad. And I'll take you to school." "You want to make sure I go?" "I do. You've got prior convictions in this happy family for just disappearing, so I'm taking you. Besides, I want to. At one point we thought we were losing you, so I'm taking good care of you from now on. I'll probably pick you up later as well, but if anything happens to stop me, I'll text and you can catch the school bus." Matt remained in the car and watched as his son turned and gave a hand salute that meant he could go. He smiled to himself. He'd go when he was sure Harry was safe. Within a minute, Harry was surrounded, and Matt watched the flurry of high fives that Harry received. He breathed a sigh of relief. He had expected this welcome, but had wanted to see for himself that Harry wasn't likely to experience thoughtless bullying as a result of his escapade. He waited a minute, heard the bell to summon the pupils into classes, and drove away. So far, so good. He continued his journey to his office at Gleedless, seeing the welcoming lights on inside the premises that told him Carol Flynn was already there and hopefully brewing the coffee. Carol was just about to enter his office as he opened the front door. "Morning," she said, handing him the 3 envelopes she held in her hand. "I've kept the generic ones, but these are all personally addressed to you. Coffee is ready. And how's Harry?" "I dropped him off at school and everything seemed okay. I'll breathe a sigh of relief if I get through the day without a text message from him. He was really nervous, but from what I saw it seemed he was the hero of the hour. He did what I imagine 50% of the kids at that school have wanted to do at some point in their lives. Harry didn't do it to escape trouble, though. He did it to stop me getting into trouble." "He'll be fine. The first day is always the hardest. Tomorrow will be just another school day. You ready for a coffee now?" "I am. My last one was out on the patio about 6 this morning with Karen. She had an early meeting, but as she left she got a phone call from the station with reports of a dead body. You heard anything on the news?" She gave a slight nod. "Sort of. Just something along the lines of a lot of police activity near Crystal Peaks, and the area around the shopping mall has been closed off. It didn't say why. I'll check Facebook. There's always somebody on there who knows exactly what's happening. I'll get you coffee, then fill you in on your day. Steve's not in today, he reminded her. They've had a good time? She knew his colleague Steve and Matt's sister Hermia had spent the weekend in Stratford-upon-Avon to give them a much-needed break before the birth of their baby, as they waited out the last couple of weeks of her pregnancy. From the amount of photos they've been sending us, it seems they have. They're off to see something Hermia only thought about last night, then travelling home later. The message also involved a picture of the huge hotel breakfast they were eating at the time. It made our bacon butties look sad. That reminds me, I had a phone call last night while I was helping Harry sort out his stuff he would need for today, but I'd left the phone downstairs. I heard it, but left it, figuring they would call me back if it was urgent. The number wasn't one I recognised. They didn't leave a voicemail, and I didn't get a return call. He held out his phone for Carol to see it. You recognise it? She looked at it for a moment. I'll do a quick run through on Watson, see if it throws up anything. Watson, their own private version of Holmes, the police Home Office large major inquiry system, held details of anything that had ever passed through the files of the Forrester Detective Agency, going right back to its inception with Matt's father, Dave Forrester. Thanks. I know I could call it back, but I don't want to get involved with anybody trying to sell me investment opportunities. He grinned at her. I'll get us those coffees now, shall I? She scribbled the phone number on a piece of paper and handed his phone back. I'll do this while you're doing the coffee. We've got new mugs. We have? He headed through to the tiny kitchen area where the new mugs stood proudly on the side. There were two that said Boss, although in different colours, and one that said Slave. He filled two up and carried the Slave to his desk, taking the Boss one through to Carol. She was staring at the screen of her computer. That number? She said hesitantly. I thought I almost recognised it. We removed it from our phones. It belongs to Susan Hunter. Chapter 2. Susan Hunter? Matt's look of surprise flashed across his face. I thought she'd disappeared out of our lives. Wonder what she wants. I'm not convinced we want or need her back. I tend to think of her when she occasionally flashes across my mind as an evil witch. And we certainly cleared everything up some months ago with her so-called case. You want me to get her for you? He shook his head. No, if she really wants us for a genuine reason, she'll ring back. And it can't be that urgent because it was 9-ish last night when she rang. And as I said, she didn't leave a voicemail. She's not rung the office. Carol shook her head. No, I've already checked our messages. Nothing there at all. Well, I'm not keen to get reacquainted with her, so we'll ignore it until, or if, she tries again. OK. You in the office all day? Probably. I decided not to put anything in the diary just in case there is some sort of issue with Harry. But if everything is good, it will all be back to normal tomorrow. Matt disappeared into his own office, and Carol smiled. All of them had felt a sense of relief that Harry had been cleared to return to school. Matt's sister Hermia had taken on the role of home tuition, but the birth of her baby was drawing ever closer, and she was showing the tiredness that she was obviously feeling. Yes, Carol acknowledged, it was time for her favourite people to get back to some form of normality. Although Carol was an employee since the agency's early days, she considered herself to be a presence in the Forrester family, and felt their various woes and happiness almost as strongly as if they formed part of her own family. Steve and Hermia arrived home just before lunchtime, and Steve sat back with a sigh. Is that it? Is what it? Herms looked and sounded puzzled by the question. All our gallivanting done until our child is safely delivered into our arms. She gave a gentle laugh. It is. Not sure I have enough energy for even one more gallivant, not even to the shops, and you might need to remember we have no milk, or bread, or chocolate." She opened the passenger door and breathed a sigh of relief. Chocolate. "Come on, we'll go and get the kettle on, and then I'll take a jug to Matt's and raid their fridge for milk. If you live next door to the brother-in-law, you have to take full advantage." "Smart thinking," Hermia said, wincing as she straightened her spine after the long car journey. "But that won't solve the chocolate issue. You might have to nip along the road to the co-op." "I'll go later. Give you time to make an actual list. My priority is getting you inside, on that sofa with your feet up and a cuppa in your hand. That sound okay?" "It sounds perfect," she said, smiling at him. "I'll message Matt to tell him we're doing a milk raid of his fridge, but we'll buy him a bottle to replace it when you go to the shops." Steve carried their suitcase through to the house, leaving it at the bottom of the stairs for transport to the bedroom later, grabbed a jug from the kitchen and hurried across to the Forrester home to get enough milk to last them until he went on his shopping expedition. Hermia clicked on the kettle, took down 2 mugs and moved into the lounge. She really felt tired, and the pains her midwife had confirmed were merely Braxton Hicks were really becoming a little bit more than annoying. Why did nobody mention the side effects of a thoroughly enjoyable night of unprotected sex? Braxton Hicks should be top of the list. She lay back on the sofa and closed her eyes. Experience had taught her how to deal with the irregular contractions, and she relaxed. By the time Steve carried the 2 mugs of newly brewed tea into the lounge, she was fast asleep. Matt opened up the file on his laptop that always seemed to surprise him every time he inspected it. They had diversified into security almost by accident, after getting several requests for help with choosing the right systems for businesses in their area. They had partnered with the company that set up the Forresters' own high-level office security system, and it had proved to be an excellent relationship. It was now taking on a life of its own, and most days saw a new request for a consultation and a quote. Carol did the initial work, setting up a file for each query, complete with all relevant information that had arrived with the primary email document. It was then forwarded through to both Matt and Steve, where they decided between them who would deal with what, depending on their current workload. It had panned out remarkably well, and Matt saw there were 3 new businesses requiring help. He sent off a quick response to each one, assuring them they would be in touch within 24 hours and thanking them for their contact. He then moved on to the emails he had sent out the previous Friday, promising contact on Monday, and listed the 4 names in his notebook. Having seen the original queries the previous Friday, he had earmarked one he considered would be right up his street, the Burley Spa Bathhouse. It seemed that a small group called Friends of the Bathhouse had received a lottery grant to up the security on the Victorian building, and they had approached Forresters following a glowing reference from another small business in the area who had been very satisfied with the work undertaken by the local detective agency. He had been down the path that led off Burley Spa Lane and ended at the bathhouse many times, both as a child and an adult, but the building itself never seemed to be open. Surely he could get sight of the inside of it if they were wanting quotes for security on it. And would it look completely unprofessional if he took Harry with him? He knew the answer to that thought almost before it floated around his brain. He would take Harry, but only at some future time, once they had received agreement for the work to be done. He picked up the phone and rang the number. Once appointments for all 4 of the Friday emails had been sorted, he sat back, trying to remember how it had all happened with Susan Hunter. She had managed to get into their office because their security had been pathetic, and it had prompted a massive upgrade of cameras and alarms. The work had taken place over about a week, and the van parked outside had stated they fitted full security systems. It seemed to have grown from that, And now there was even talk of taking on an extra person to deal solely with that side of the business. He drained the last of his cold coffee and pulled forward the invoices Carol had completed. She insisted either him or Steve check them before she sent them out, saying they might spot an omission from the original worksheet. So he opened his diary file and began the somewhat boring job of checking something he knew would be accurate to the ultimate degree. There were 6 in total, and he initialed each one before heading out into the reception area. He passed the paperwork through the sliding window. "Everything okay?" Carol asked. "Absolutely fine. If you stick stamps on the envelopes, I'll nip across and post them." She laughed. "You're bored." "Of course not." He hesitated. "Yes." "Matt, Harry will be fine," she said gently. "And if the school or even Harry needs you, they can get you on your mobile. Now go and do something." "Tyrant," he grumbled, and heard her laughter as he closed the glass pane. Sitting at his desk didn't help. Neither did spending money on Amazon. He needed to know Harry was okay, and buying a new iPad wasn't going to give him the answer. He rang school, knowing he wouldn't settle until somebody confirmed his son was fine and hadn't decided to run away from any problems again. The school secretary was more than helpful. "I've just seen him in goal. He's out on the pitch, and I swear there's about 15 kids in each team, girls and boys. Harry's always been their first choice for goalie, and he's there today. I stood watching them for a bit. Never seen so many high fives as have been given to your son. So stop worrying, Mr. Forrester. We're taking care of him. The kids are as well. In fact, seems to me, he's a bit of a legend." He thanked her and disconnected. Carol, of course, laughed at him for giving in and checking with school, then handed him the small batch of envelopes duly stamped. "We're running low on stamps. Here's £20 from petty cash. Can you bring as many as you can get for that money, please? It won't be many, but make sure you get a receipt. You still don't want to send these via email?" Matt shook his head. "No, it's all about creating an impression. It's good to feel quality paper, a quality letterhead in your hand. Quotes and invoices we'll continue to issue like this. Anything else is email." He gave a small salute in acknowledgement and let himself out of the front door. He waited for the tram to go by, then hurried across the road towards the post office. 1 or 2 people said hello, and he felt good that the neighbourhood was getting used to their presence. The business was thriving, and he frequently wondered how his dad would have reacted to the many changes they had made since his death. He slid the newly bought stamps and receipt into his inner pocket and left the shop. He heard his ring tone and pulled out his phone. His relief was palpable as he saw Karen's name on the screen. "You in the office?" she asked. "I've just been sent out on junior duties, posting envelopes and buying stamps. Heading back now. You want me to pick you up a sandwich for lunch?" There was a momentary hesitation. "No, that's fine. I won't be staying long. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Wait for me." They disconnected, and he ran across the tram tracks. Karen had sounded stressed, and he put on a fresh pot of coffee for when she arrived. Carol wasn't impressed by the small number of stamps he'd managed to exchange for the £20 note. "Not good enough," she said. "I'm sure there must be a cheaper way of posting things. I'll look into it." "I've put a fresh pot of coffee on. You want one? Karen should be here any minute." Carol shook her head. "No, I'm good, thanks. I've got water. We've got scones, though," she added, and flourished a plastic box. "That's probably why she's coming." He turned at the sound of a car pulling onto the shop forecourt and went out to meet her. Karen wasn't alone. D.S. Ray Ledger was in the passenger seat. "Good to see you, Ray." He shook hands with the man he had known for several years. "And you, boss," Ray replied. Karen and Matt exchanged a smile. Matt would always be boss to Ray, despite the length of time Matt had now worked in the private sector, well away from South Yorkshire police. "I'm assuming you're here for a reason. I've got a fresh pot of coffee and Carol's made some scones. Let's go through and be civilised for 10 minutes. "That's about all the time we have," Karen confirmed. "The dead body I was called out to this morning has actually led us here." They went into Matt's office and sat down. Carol appeared immediately with the box of scones and asked what they wanted to drink. They all said coffee, and as she left the room, Karen asked her to return to sit with them. Carol nodded. Within 2 minutes they were all seated around Matt's desk, and Karen spoke. "The body at Crystal Peaks was found at the top of those stairs that connect the retail park to the main shopping centre. Know what I mean? Round the back of TK Maxx." Both Matt and Carol nodded. "We've identified her and found her car in the top car park, parked outside Boots the chemist's." Matt's intuition kicked into overdrive. "You're about to tell us it's Susan Hunter, aren't you?" Chapter 3. Karen frowned. "You did it?" "No," he said, surmising she was joking. "It's against the law. Seriously, though, her name cropped up this morning. It was actually just a wild guess. And now let me guess something else. You've got her phone." "We have. It was underneath her body when the forensic people moved her. We managed to get into it because it's fingerprint activated. The last call she made was to you at 9 last night." "I didn't answer it. I was sorting Harry's uniform out and I heard it ringing, but my phone was downstairs. She didn't ring back or leave a message. I haven't heard anything since then." "You knew it was Susan?" He shook his head. "No. I removed her number from my phone. Don't like the woman, and didn't imagine I'd ever hear from her again. Carol checked it for me this morning, and obviously her contact details are in Watson. I decided not to ring her back, figuring if she really wanted to speak to me, she'd try again." "When did she die?" Carol asked, quietly. "We've only had a rough estimate. We'll know a little more accurately after the PM, but between 9 and 11 last night was mentioned." "Well, that's a relief," Matt said. "I've got the best alibi ever. I was with the SIO of the case." Ray shook his head. "We didn't think for a minute you'd done it, boss. We were more interested to find out if you were working a case that involved her. We've nothing on CCTV that will help because the camera that covers those stairs has been smashed, conveniently for the killer." "Well, you can scratch me out," Matt replied. "I haven't heard anything from her for months. It's definitely murder, then?" "It is. Knife into her stomach and she bled out. One of the Crystal Peaks security men found her. Rattled the poor man a bit, I can tell you." "I can't remember much about her, but we can let you have sight of the file we do hold. She had connections with some of the low life of Sheffield, and she seemed a bit desperate for money, but that could all have changed." Carol frowned and opened the box of scones. "After I'd threatened to smash her face into the steering wheel, she sort of disappeared off our radar." Karen sighed and picked up a scone. "You do know we knew you had no connection, don't you? We only came on the off chance there would be scones." Ray took a bite from his scone and stared at Carol. "Threatened to smash her face into the steering wheel?" "It's a manoeuvre I was taught in my previous job." "I thought you worked with some high-ranking politician." "I did," she said and grinned. "And don't ask me to demonstrate." "Not bloody likely," Ray said, taking a second bite of what he considered the best scone he'd ever tasted. Carol and Matt stood side by side at the open front door, enjoying the slight breeze and the warmth of the sun. They waved as Karen and Ray drove away, then turned and headed back inside. "Strange," Carol said. "It is," Matt agreed, and Carol looked at him. "I mean, strange that she's tried to contact you. You think she was feeling threatened and wanted some help?" "Possibly. I feel guilty for not answering now." Your phone wasn't glued to your hand, Matt. It was downstairs and you'd gone to Harry's bedroom. You can't blame yourself. He nodded, acknowledging her words, but she didn't miss the frown across his forehead. Harry walked out of the school gates, deep in conversation with a boy his father didn't recognise. Matt waved as Harry lifted his head. He climbed back into the car, then sat waiting patiently for the conversation between the two lads to end. Harry eventually slid in beside him. "Okay?" Matt asked. "Yep, he's new." "The lad you've just been chatting to?" "Yes, he's called Isaac. Smashed me in the face with a football." Harry turned his face towards his dad and pointed to the red mark high on his cheekbone. "Ouch." "He said sorry, and the ball didn't go in the net, so it's all okay." "Oh, good. I'm pleased he didn't score." "We're both trying out for the school team next week, because after September we're old enough to be in it." "So today's been good then?" "It's been ace. Glad I came back now." The journey home was driven in silence, and as they pulled onto the large driveway, Harry leaned forward. "Auntie Herms and Uncle Steve are home." "They are. Don't go bounding in just in case Auntie Herms is having a rest. She messaged earlier to say she felt tired. It had been a long journey." "I'll go round after we've eaten. Will Karen be home late?" "No idea. The death I mentioned this morning turns out to be unnatural causes." Harry was halfway out of the car and he swung himself back in. "What?" "It's death at the hands of somebody else, so it depends on what they've discovered during today as to what time she gets home. The plan originally was to go to McDonald's tonight to celebrate your return to school, but it's highly unlikely that's going to happen now." "So, are you cooking?" "I am. What do you fancy?" "McDonald's." The family conference involving Steve, Herms, Matt and Harry decided to order in a takeaway McDonald's, and somehow Matt found himself logging into the app on his phone. He stared in amazement at the price of 4 Big Mac meals and 4 McFlurries, and ordered them quickly to avoid dwelling on the amount disappearing out of his bank account. "My treat," he whispered, and pretended to wipe sweat from his brow. "Well, I can't afford it," Steve said. "I took your sister to Stratford for a few days, and she used our credit card." "She's not my sister, she's your wife." "So she's solely my responsibility now?" "She is." "That can't be right. That wasn't in the marriage vows, was it?" "Oi, you two." Hermia wagged her finger. "Pack it in, I'm worth every penny. Have you heard from Karen?" "Not since she left at lunchtime. The first day on a murder case is always a long one." "Is there a touch of nostalgia in your voice?" Hermia smiled at her brother. "Not likely. I miss the people, but I don't miss the job. Funnily enough, we always seem to be on the periphery of the major crimes, though." Steve came through from the kitchen carrying various condiments. "That could be something to do with sleeping with the lead detective of the major crimes unit. Does Karen talk in her sleep?" "Only to nag me. We do tend to discuss her bigger jobs, though, I must admit. And as this one involves an ex-client of Forrester's, there's half a chance it will be our topic of conversation tonight. I'm a bit puzzled as to why Susan Hunter rang me, although I do have to say that even if I'd known the call was from her, I probably wouldn't have answered it. I don't suppose we'll ever know now." Karen attended the delayed meeting, took no part whatsoever in it, and left as quickly as she could. They could talk drug reduction as many times as they wanted. It would make no difference to the low-lifes in Sheffield who ruined so many lives. And it seemed, as soon as they managed to send a bunch of the top dealers to prison, there were more waiting to step into their shoes. The crime scene was only a 5-minute walk from the police station, but she opted to take her car. She'd bring her new team member back with her. PC Rachel Quixley hadn't been introduced to the rest of the team and had been thrown in at the deep end in a spectacular fashion. Karen knew the young PC had requested a move to major crimes a couple of times, and she had received the transfer notification on Friday. When Karen had said to the desk sergeant she wanted her team calling in to attend the crime scene, Rachel had been on the list. They had all arrived within a few minutes, and she had watched Rachel's face lose its colour as she had first sight of the copious amounts of blood surrounding the body. Forensics were erecting the tent, and now the goriness was hidden from view. It wasn't only Rachel who felt better. When Karen asked that someone remain with the forensics team until they had finished their work, Rachel volunteered. But now, as SIO, Karen felt it was time to head back, taking Rachel with her, see if anything further had been discovered, and arrange for a member of the afternoon shift to take over from the uniformed constable who was currently supporting the forensics team at the crime scene. Maybe then she could get to know Rachel a little better, and introduce her to the rest of the team, who were trying to piece together anything they could find about the victim. An officer held up the crime scene tape, blocking off the entire bottom section of the car park, and she drove through. None of the shops had been allowed to open, and it seemed strange to see so many empty parking spaces. The white tent was still in place, and a coroner's van was standing by with its rear doors open. Rachel had moved to one side, away from the tent entrance. The two women turned to each other. "Rachel, you okay?" Rachel nodded. "Yes, I'm fine. Bit of an initiation by fire, but I'm over it, thank you, ma'am." "Call me boss, Rachel. The rest of them do. I've arranged for a couple of officers to be here overnight until we get the site cleaned up, so I'll be taking you back to the station with me when they arrive. Do we know any more?" "They're ready to move the body. It's apparently taken longer than normal because they've done loads of the tests that they needed to do with the lady in situ. They've found her bag in the bushes, with her contact details and £180 in notes, plus some change in it, along with a prescription of antibiotics she had just collected from Boots' evening collection window. So it doesn't seem as if she was mugged for money. They have the phone, of course. A truck came and took her car for forensic examination about an hour ago, so I just took notes of the time anything happened and tried not to get in the way." "Good girl. That was the right thing to do. I'm sorry I threw you in at the deep end. I thought I'd be able to introduce you to the team first thing, get you mingling with them, that sort of stuff. But we didn't even start off at the station. So, once Ms. Hunter has been removed, we'll head off back to Moss Way. You had anything to eat and drink?" Rachel smiled. "A cheeseburger and a bottle of water. A crime scene virtually next door to a McDonald's." "Good. An early start like this usually means we all miss out on breakfast, although I have to admit I didn't. The call came through just as I was leaving home this morning for a crack of dawn meeting." There was a flurry of movement inside the tent, and the two women stepped back. They stood with respect and watched as the body of Susan Hunter was loaded into the coroner's van. Chapter 4. Everyone was sitting silently, waiting for Karen to sort through her notes before addressing them. She eventually looked up and thanked everybody for their patience. "Before we go into the case itself, I want to introduce you to our new team member who has been on duty down at the crime site all day. Would you believe she actually applied to work at Major Crimes?" Without exception, everyone shook their heads as if in amazement at such a folly. "Her name is Rachel. PC Rachel Quixley. She's moved here from uniform, and after today we no longer treat her as the new girl. She's a valued member of our team, and she wasn't sick when she saw the victim and all the blood this morning, so she's definitely passed her first test. Rachel, we have a team of 5, including me. You now make us a team of 6. The others are DS Ray Ledger, DC Kevin Potter, DC Jamie Hanover, DC Ian Jameson, and me, DI Karen Nelson. Our DCI is Daniel Armitage, and our superintendent is Carl Granger. You'll not remember all our names at first, but I prefer boss anyway. Welcome to the team, Rachel." Rachel gave a slight nod of acknowledgement and sat back to take in her first briefing. Reading crime books hadn't prepared her for anything that had happened today, and she had no idea what to expect. Karen looked back at the whiteboard with a picture of Susan Hunter attached to it. This was a brutal murder. At the moment, we have no idea of the motive, the perpetrator, the weapon he or she used. In fact, we know very little. She made a phone call at 9 last night and was killed shortly after. For those that don't know, the phone call was to my partner, Matt. He didn't answer it because he didn't have his phone with him, but Susan Hunter was a previous client of the Forrester Detective Agency. Rachel, Matt Forrester, my life partner and owner of the Forrester Detective Agency, used to be DI in the Major Crimes Unit. You probably remember him from that time. He worked out of Moss Way. A look of surprise flashed across Rachel's face, but again she confirmed she understood by giving a brief nod. So, Jamie, I want to know everything there is to know about Susan Hunter. I can tell you that she was in Australia for 5 years, but returned to her roots here in Sheffield sometime last year. She was a temporary client of the Forrester Agency, but after she attacked a member of their staff, they dumped her. According to Matt, they've heard nothing from her since then, and he'd removed her from his contacts list in his phone. He had no idea the strange number in his call log had come from Ms. Hunter until he turned up at the office today, and his PA tracked it back to Susan Hunter. Am I okay to contact Forresters? Jamie asked. Yes, of course. I suggest you contact Carol Flynn. She's definitely the smart cookie there. She's put in place their own homes system, called it Watson. It's an amazing setup, and everything that happens within the business is logged into it. She's taken it right back to the first day when Dave Forrester opened the business, so it's a massive resource for them. But what's more important is that it's accurate. She just put the random number from Matt's phone into Watson, and it came up with an immediate answer for the caller, along with the link to all information they held on her. I'll message Carol and tell her you may be calling her. Thanks, boss. Jamie sat back and breathed a sigh of relief. It was always easier when the way forward was cleared for them, and she was feeling a little out of sorts, wanting the day to be over so she could crawl back into bed and sleep. The previous night's pregnancy test result had thrown a huge curveball into her life, and sleep hadn't really happened at all. Her tiny one-bedroom flat had felt suddenly claustrophobic, and she had hurled the testing stick into her bedside drawer and headed out of her home, the home that now felt violated. 2 hours of walking hadn't helped. It had produced a huge blister on her heel, but nothing seemed any clearer. Jamie listened to the rest of the briefing in a mildly befuddled state, then opened up her computer as everybody stood to follow up on jobs that had been allocated. She felt somebody move to stand by her, and looked up to see Rachel. Can I help? I don't know what to do. Then welcome to the team. Half the time we don't know what to do, but miraculously we've never had a cold case. We've solved them all either by good luck or ignorance. The biggest piece of advice I can give is do what I did when I joined Major Crimes. Stick with the boss. In my case, it was Matt Forrester initially, but when he left, I simply transferred my allegiance to Karen. She'll talk you through everything, and she'll have you back when you balled something up. Just try not to kill anybody, it's frowned upon. Rachel laughed. I'll try. I've worked hard to get this transfer, so, to use your words, I don't want to balls anything up. They watched as Karen's office door opened, and she headed towards where the two of them were watching her. OK, Rachel, we're going back down to the crime scene. With the body out of the way, we can have a proper look around. I'll tell you anything that looks a bit off to me, and eventually you'll learn what to look for, not just in death cases, but in all major crime cases. They parked in the taped-off area and sat for a moment watching everything still being meticulously checked by the forensics team. The temperature was dropping, and Karen shivered. That spring sunshine during the day certainly fools you into thinking warmer weather is on the way. Come on, let's go and see what we can see and get back to the station. The Crystal Peaks shopping mall was separated from the retail park by a hillside and a main road. This resulted in the top of the access steps linking the two shopping areas being in the retail park, and the bottom of them being down in the car park of the shopping mall, linked by disability-friendly ramps and a long tunnel traversing under the main road. Susan Hunter's body had been found at the top end, and the two police officers stood and simply looked. "It's pretty, isn't it, when it's looking normal?" Rachel said quietly, her mind visualising the scene that she knew would never leave her, the one with a dead body and so much blood. "It is. And I must confess I had never seen this little area tucked behind the shops before. That stainless steel monument thing is stunning. And the two round seats with the plaques in the middle of them bear the names of children who were at the local school when this area was constructed back in 2004. It has such a peaceful vibe to it,